Okay, today we're going to be looking at fire lighting by spark using our trusty ferrocerium rod and bundles of twigs. So we've been a bit selective about the twigs that we're going to use. We've got some very fine birch twigs here. Birch is an ideal option if it's available because it's got this very thin growth habit, which means you can find lots of thin twigs to gather, and the bark in birch has got 40% more energy than wood. So it gives us a good hot start to our fire. Now, I've been careful about selecting the site. I've cleared the leaves back so that when we're finished we can clear away and leave no trace and cover the fire scar back over with the leaves. And I've also made sure there's no tree roots underneath that are going to be damaged, no branches or foliage overhead. Now, the floor is very damp, as you can see, so we've put a little twig platform down there just so that the start of the fire is off that cold damp ground. If we were using a fibrous tinder bundle, that would be even more important. We're going to use birch bark, but it's still nice to get away from that cold damp ground just for the start of the fire. So we've got everything within reach, and we've sorted all of our fuel into similar sized lengths to make it easy to build the fire with a good stable structure, so we get really good oxygen supply, which we'll see in a moment. So we've got very fine twigs in the birch, then we've got small twigs here, slightly larger, and 3 more sizes. And once we're up to decent sized fuel that's intersecting in the middle of the fire, then we can sit back and relax and know that the fire's in and going to hold for a while. Okay, so the first thing we've got to do is get our birch bark lit, and this is quite thin, this bark, so we've just fluffed it up a little bit. Now, if I put it on the twig platform, it can all be a bit unstable, so it's often easier to just light it on the ground. If we had thicker bark, we'd need to scrape the back of it to create some dust. But this fine material on the outside, where it's naturally shedding, lights quite easily without much preparation. There we go. Now, birch bark has a tendency to roll up on itself, so you need to be aware of that. I've got a little bit more here, so I'm going to add that onto it, and we can see that rich black smoke from all of that tar in the bark. So now I want to get these twigs crossing over and into the thermal column, and all the way through this process we're constantly thinking about the thermal column. Now, the bundles are long enough that I can hold them, and if I start to lose the fire underneath, if I'm taking out too much oxygen, I can lift back up again. So I'm going to support them and watch until the seat of the fire has moved into the twigs, because if I push down too early, then I can exclude the oxygen and I could potentially put the fire out. Now we can see that that's starting to move into the twig bundles now, so it's no risk of it going out if I let it settle all the way down. And as I say, if I did start to see less light, I could just lift them back up for a second. So now we're going to move on to the next size of fuel. Now I'm thinking about stability already, so I'm going to start putting the fuel on at 90 degrees in layers. And this smaller stuff's a little bit twiggy, but you'll start to see the structure take shape. We don't want to disturb the fire too much. We just want to build on top, but very gently, so all of these sticks are long enough that I can keep my hand out of the thermal column to the side and put the sticks down gently, rather than being tempted to throw them on top from a height to save burning my fingers, because if we do that, every stick that we put onto the fire will reduce the height of the wood pile and reduce the oxygen supply within it. And it's a pretty damp day. A lot of these sticks are a little bit on the damp side. They're the driest we could find, and they're dry inside, but the outsides are quite damp. So if we just drop them on and reduce the height of the fire, we're certainly going to slow down how effectively the fire lights, and we may end up being unsuccessful if we're too heavy-handed. So nice long lengths, hand out to the side of the thermal column, and you can keep placing the sticks on without any risk of getting warm fingers. I'll have one more on that way. And we can see the wood pile is starting to look a little bit like a Jenga tower. We've got this lattice or crisscross pattern in there, and we've got lots of oxygen supply through there, and if it falls or settles, we can stick a stick in the lattice and just shift it back up and carry on building. That's looking a little bit like it might want to shift to one side. Now, if I was needing to cook for a large group and I needed a big fire, then I'd have split my wood into a couple of different lengths, and I'd have used the raised fire platform over the other side, in which case I usually do 3 of these little starts, 3 seats of fire, and then build a crisscross fire lay along it, but with 2 different lengths of wood. So obviously one long length to go across all 3 seats of the fire, and then the shorter length to go widthways across. And you can build a very big hot fire very, very quickly that way, and it burns down to give you a huge bed of embers for cooking in about 15 or 20 minutes. And this works really well for that. Now, once we get the fire established, we don't want to be a slave to it and be constantly running around. So although we've used this shape, this crisscross lattice pattern to begin with, if we keep using that, it's very, very fuel hungry, and we're constantly going to be feeding wood on there. So what we really want to aim to do is get to a point where we're creating a bit of a bed of embers here, and then we can get some larger fuel burning. And generally speaking, I tend to use a star shape for that, because once we've got the fire lit, then if we can have longer pieces of wood intersecting in the middle, they'll keep burning. But if we wander off doing something and leave the fire, it won't consume lots of fuel. The logs will burn through and sit flat with the ends in a big bed of embers. And even if we've been gone for a few hours, the thermal insulation of the ash means that you can blow in the bottom of there, find a few embers, and as soon as you get the logs glowing and intersecting and stacked on top of each other, so long as you have 3 logs, you'll get flames again straight away without needing to go and collect smaller fuel. So home and dry is when you've got 3 minimum decent sized pieces of fuel lengthways into the middle of the fire, and you've got all of those burning. So they're not massive, but I've got 3 slightly longer sticks here, so this will mean that if I walk off for half an hour, I'll definitely be able to rekindle the fire. So long as I get these in here and get them going, by the time everything else is burnt out from underneath them, then we know we'll be able to keep the fire going, and even if we've lost the flame, a little bit of oxygen will do. And I'll put a couple more on here because I've got them. And now we can sit back and relax, and that's going to take care of itself for at least half an hour.